venture that I did before Kim Publishing. Thanks for picking up the book. And we're reading The Spirit of Things. This is number 7, I believe, which is The Primitive State of Man. And it goes from pages in volume 1, 27 to 30. It's right at the top of page 30. So I wanted to conserve space, so that's why the format is the way it is. It's a book, so I don't want to waste any white space if possible. So that's where we're at. Anyway, haven't read this yet, so it'll be interesting to kind of go over. Primitive State of Man. Well, I read it when editing, but I haven't read it for the sake of contemplative work. The daily occupation of man, his need to introduce order and regularity everywhere, his inclination to add to this order and regularity the charm of taste and the products of a magical imagination, indicate that, in his most perfect primitive state, he still had to improve and beautify everything around him, and further adorn the dwelling he inhabited. He could even persuade himself by reflecting carefully that all the people of the earth engage in these arrangements and terrestrial dispositions, either by themselves or through their subordinates. For he would see that a uniform law, common to all and admitting of variations only in the mode of its execution, is an inherent law of being, and follows this being even in the extremes to which it may surrender. Finally, by distinguishing between the material and coarse tasks of man's earthly existence, which seem to be a decree of condemnation for the entire species, and the taste for order and the improvement of this very earth that occupies all humanity, and suggests rather a privilege than a punishment, one can affirm that the purpose of man's primitive existence was, indeed, the improvement and embellishment of the region in which he was placed. An improvement and embellishment he would have drawn from the superior source from which he descended, and then applied throughout all parts of his domain. It is the same course that man still follows today when he has plans to conceive and works to produce. He concentrates, he opens himself inwardly to his own source, and he seems to wait for the clarity he seeks and the instructive ray he needs from a focal point that is apart and distinct from him. And his works are more or less regular depending on how consistently he seeks that instructive ray and how attentively he follows its light. Thus, the more man adhered to the order that bound him to his principle, the more successfully he would have fulfilled this task of cultivation, which was evidently imposed upon him. And conversely, the more zealously and successfully he worked at this cultivation, the more he would have extended to himself all the benefits of the higher order from which he drew his constitutive essence. For everything had to be connected for man in this supreme work, as everything would still be today if material and coarse tasks did not narrow his measures, and if inferior powers, whether religious or civil, governing all human social life, did not break them or entirely absorb them. Wow. So it's saying that we would be happy if we stopped seeking the things we think make us happy, because that is the intention behind us being here, is to be happy and seek our own beautification of the world that we're in. Man would therefore have been the eye or organ through which the superior and divine luminous order would have filtered, filling all individuals of the human species, and by its infinite diversities forming for them and by them the most delightful harmony, as man can still observe today when he returns to himself and directs his inward vision toward the source of his being. He feels this superior order descending within him. By this he naturally becomes the friend and brother of all men, and finds neither the desire to be their master nor the need to be their subject or disciple. Samartan's throwing it out there again. He's basically reforming the ego developments that happened in a land where individuality was not present. So he's talking about the teacher-student relationship, um, which is really interesting because, in my particular uh, church theological training, they talk about this master chela, is what it's called in the East, kind of relationship where, you sit there at the feet of a guru and the guru constantly teaches you. Now, that's not to say that the universal source can't come through a teacher that you trust and have listened to multiple lectures, and you get what I call teaching moments. That's when your perspective changes based on it being a perspective from someone other than you and grounded in the reality of the all-being. Thus, today among men, the law of religious and political administration is but a law of circumstance that belongs more to the individual than to the species, since only a certain number appear as its bearers, and it undoubtedly, through an alteration and inversion that in a class of beings who have received the same origin in essence, some enjoy all rights while others have none. Whew. Samartan is saying that not everyone is equal in their actual position on this planet. That's pretty important to know. That you may have specific, wants, but necessarily those are not yours because they're a want, they're a desire. Now, you should go out and get them if you want them, and pay the prices that everybody else has to pay who has them. Now, I'm not trying to move into an old head frame of reference, but that's what he's saying. He's saying some enjoy the rights while others have none. If man's properties are only more restricted today than they should have been when he was in his true measure, we can still form an idea of his primitive rights. Indeed, the true nature of man in his rightful measure was to produce harmony, to spread all sorts of wonders around him, to raise altars to his principle in all regions, to cultivate all the treasures of nature, to gather them from within her, and to further perfect them by passing them through himself for the expansion of the realm of truth. He can read the proof of this prime law in all the inventions and arts in which he successfully engages, even if it is materially. Does he not purify through his manipulations all the substances of this lower world? Does he not produce harmonious sounds with his fingers? Does he not heal through the advice conveyed by his words? Does he not overthrow armies by the strength of his arm? Does he not give birth through painting to the image of all creations? And if the sad state we are in, where he can only produce these things of the lower order, they are still so marvelous, what would it be if he were reintegrated into the realities? Oh, quick cut right there, saying that those things are not the realities, that there are higher realities than those things. Samartan is so cunning the way he frames everything that he's presenting to us. It's really good. I think that he did an excellent job in this book. Hope you go pick it up. One can also say that each man is a whole nation, distinct from other men or other nations. That is why, when they lose sight of the predominant unity, which alone can bring them into harmony, men understand each other so little in the interactions they have with one another. Finally, man's true nature is to be numerically a continuous spiritual multiplication. His inner root must actively and constantly rise to its power, and each act of his life, thought, and desire must be a new bud. Now, this just goes to show you that the French translation here, if you know your Elukoan language, it said his inner root. That is a numerical principle in the Koan where we talk about roots and squares and on and on and on. So it does properly translate using computer translation. Of course, we have to proofread and we have to read through something because, in the old Google Translate days, you never knew when you would see a hunk of cheese in your paragraph. But it's not doing that anymore. AI is smart enough to help us with these dictionary revelatory texts. So, if you know the philosophy in English, then you can see that it's talking about this. The inner root must actively and constantly rise to its power, and each act of his life, thought, and desire must be a new bud. We're seeing a Rosicrucian and arithmosophy there. There's a lot of thoughts that go into this. It is through this continuous sequence of vibrant acts that he should have become a great tree. Again, in Julius Evola, we have the tree talked about in the Hermetic tradition and the Group stuff. So I really like the way that the translation came out. Hopefully you do too. Thus, even today, he must not grow only in one or a few of his branches, but in all of them at once, as his animal bodily being does. Meditate on this, man of desire, and make sure that all the faculties that constitute your thinking being, without exception, are animated with effective and operative life. Recognize here in what you should resemble your principle. This principle is the universal tree that continually produces itself, in which existence and harmony are one and the same being. You, man, are a partial and secondary tree to which essence has been given, but you are tasked with elevating yourself to your harmonic degree. The first source has eternally been God. To you, it is left only to care to become like it. And in this entrusted care, woe to you if you do not heed the sublime privilege you share with your ineffable model. I love that. When he's talking about the harmonic degree, it's probably a pun, but I'm thinking of Lieve Vert, where they're talking about the octave and the relationship of, musical progression and chords and all that stuff to the actual Cohen doctrine, trying to show that there is a natural, grounding in this. And I also like that it says that you're a secondary tree, getting your essence from the primary tree. I really, really like that. Indeed, by his destiny, man should so much resemble the principle of things that we feel are being constantly overflowing with torrents of thoughts which do not cease, and which are the lively and active representation of that eternal creation that is the immanent characteristic of the supreme author of beings. We also feel affection for these ideas that abound within us, and as these would always be regular if we were well ordered, our affections would always be pure and correspond to the eternal divine love. Finally, we feel in our spirit an activity that drives us to spread these ideas that abound within us, to give them being, and this activity is for us what the eternal result is for the eternal, predominant unity. Really good stuff. That's our natural estate in book 1 of the Spirit of Things. I'm really glad that we're getting these opportunities to go through these lectures and talk about them a little bit. Maybe iron out or reveal a little nuance that's not there at first read. But anyway, thanks for coming by and listening to this short reading of The Spirit of Things, Volume 1, which you can get right there.